Validity check used for the observations and conclusions of the Releasing Your Unlimited Creativity Understanding. Introduction. Whether we realize it or not, our creativity and our creative imagination are our most valuable assets and underlies all that we do and all that we are. The Releasing Unlimited Creativity Understanding is directed at stretching our perceptions about the nature of reality to open the door to empower our creativity and our creative imagination to access the depth and breadth of our inherent creative ability and creative power. This recording addresses what I used to determine the validity of the conclusions I made about our creativity posted on the RYUC websites and the YouTube recordings based on 4 sets of information. One set of information is the observation and findings as a result of a conscious exploration into our creativity. The second is the information, observation, and findings in response to the calling, Who Will Protect My Children, which I received in 1987 and which redirected my life. The third set of information was to look across all reported human experiences which came to my attention to be integrated into a coherent paradigm. The fourth set was a knowing I received in acting in a profound compassion to use what I had learned in the journey of exploration of our creativity to free the bound creative spirit of another. Why the need for a validity check? 3 observations made in the journey of exploration of our creativity were quite different than I expected, revealed the need to some way validate my observations and conclusions. The first observation was the realization of the limitation of the human mind. The journey revealed that our human mind is limited and unable to grasp the vastness of all aspects of creation, regardless how hard it tries and what it believes about its capability. The best our human mind can do is give an approximation or best fit understanding to what is observed. Here the question is, how do we know the accuracy of our explanation? The second is that we each have a unique, individual, subjective perception of creation. No one has our pain, no one has our joy. No one experiences creation as we do. How do we know what we are experiencing is not totally unique to us, or if some other can also have the same experience? Not necessarily similar, but the same experience. In reality, given our uniqueness, we cannot know if any other will experience the same experience as we do, but it can be close. This uniqueness of our subjective perception contains the gift we have to give, and we cannot give it unless we live our uniqueness. The third observation was to see how the human mind biases and filters any observation we make, and it is an attribute we all possess. It is an attribute which appears we are all unaware simply because any observation we make arises from the fact that anything communicated by a human has been filtered by the human mind and the experiences that mind has personally had in its current lifetime, including its learned information from such activities as in school or told by another that have not been directly experienced. This bias also includes any understanding or experiences or awareness within the individual has that can transcend physical creation. The awareness may have a valid perception outside physical creation, but the information as it is reported is still filtered by the human mind. This is one reason individuals know things, but they cannot communicate them because their human mind does not have the experience to understand what is experienced in a way that can be effectively communicated. Here, the best example of this phenomenon is the nature of creating a new, original, never-before experienced creation. Mind has no way of knowing what to either do to create it or what it will look like, for the mind has never experienced it. Mind may perceive the possibility of a new original creation existing, but since the new original creation has never been experienced, mind does not know what it looks like. Here, the best example is probably the commercial product WD-40. WD-40 is a lubricant, and named WD-40 is actually water displacement number 40. Here we have an individual who had the thought, which was, can something be created that will displace water? The idea that arose in the mind had a single attribute of displacing water. However, the mind had no idea of what this water displacement material looked like. It took 39 experiments for mind to come to understand the formula or the combination of materials that would create a water displacement material. This is true for any new, original, creative endeavor. Our mind does not have the experience to know what it looks like. We may see or understand the attributes, but not what it looks like. For any true, new, original, creative endeavor, our mind will not understand it until it obtains the minimum set of experiences to understand it. But this also means there are things we think we understand, but we truly don't fully understand, because our mind characterizes the experience based on its past, and mind thinks it understands. The mind then believes its improper characterization and never sees reality for what it is. Similarly, I think the experiences of Jill Bolte Taylor in her discussion on the effects of her stroke in her left brain says it nicely. If I understand her correctly, while her left brain ceased to function until the blood clot was removed, she was completely aware of what resided in her right brain, including that awareness of being an unbounded energy permeating all of reality. But nothing could be communicated until her left brain linear thinking came back online. Alternatively said, she had volumes of information and experiences, but could not bring them into a form to communicate until the left brain and its human experience in physical creation was available to communicate it. That is, we need the minimum set of experiences to be able to talk about any other experience. We have to accurately describe the experience, and part of the function of our left brain is to access those past experiences we have had. Here, the important point is, without the prior experience in some way, we cannot communicate what we are actually experiencing. Often we communicate through analogies or similes. For example, we may say the pain felt like I was pricked by a pin, or the joy just bubbled up inside me. Neither of these descriptions are correct. Rather, they are just the best mind can do to create in its attempt to communicate what it experienced. A valid question that can be asked is, given the subjectivity and the uniqueness of our individual perceptions and the limitations of the human mind, how can I, the listener or reader, accept the reliability of the observations and findings of the author's journey if there is the possibility his perception is simply his illusion and has nothing to do with a generic truth, especially my personal truth, and what the author reports is limited in what he individually and subjectively perceived? All I can really offer you to answer this question is the validity check of my observations and conclusions described below, and suggest you do your own experiments to check for yourself. This discussion on the sanity check of the validity of my observations and conclusions will provide some way to partially neutralize the limitations of my mind and my unique individual subjective perception. I say partially, for no matter how effective what I share about our creative ability and creative power as a result of a journey into the exploration of our creativity, it is and always will be a partial truth in some way, and will have inaccuracies somewhere simply because of the limitations of the human perception. It is why the reader and the listener is always encouraged to take and eat and digest all that is said, keeping what serves you and resonates with your truth, and discard the remainder. And of course, you can always do your own experiments to prove or disprove anything that is said. Arriving at the validity check. The basis for the validity check for my observations that I used in the exploration of our creativity to describe how creation works goes back to my training as a physicist. As a physicist, in particular, best described as an energy physicist or radiation physicist, I never saw that which with I worked. I worked with unseen radiation. Here the term radiation is just a description of energy radiating outward from a source. The radiation was all around, but I could not see any of it with any of my five senses other than the visible light or feeling the infrared as heat. However, with an instrument, I could measure the energy. In knowing and understanding what I was measuring and knowing its origins, I could use the unseen energy and create certain conditions or environments to create certain effects. Along with using the instruments, there was a model which described how the electromagnetic radiation worked and how it interacted with matter. The model gave some very substantial results, such that it could predict certain experiments, predict certain effects, and the data that I would get could easily be verified and repeated. In having a good model and paradigm and an understanding of how it appears creation works, one can allow effectiveness to be the measure of truth. That is, the model is effective to be able to predict how the energy will interact, and the model is effective at being able to explain what is going on in a particular situation. I say appears creation works because although the model is effective, that does not mean that is exactly how creation works or what creation looks like. It is just an effective way of explaining the area and aspect of creation that one is exploring, the need to challenge assumptions. I think this question of the premise and challenge assumption goes back to a conversation I had with the chairman of my physics department, Dr. Biden. He said in conversation that mathematics does not lie. If you are not getting the correct or desired results, the problem is not the mathematics. Go back and look at your starting assumptions and premise, which could include the wrong choice of mathematics. I applied this thinking to all areas of my life. If the logic is correct and I was not seeing what I expected, I would go back and look at the assumptions or premise I assume that may not be valid. I also applied this to what I thought about the experiences individuals reported to me, such that my perception was brought to embrace and understand their reported experiences. As a result, their experience could require me to reevaluate my perception of creation and how it worked. How the instrument I used was calibrated. I did an experiment, and I began to meet with psychics to understand what they were seeing and how they were interpreting what they were seeing. The real breakthrough was when I was talking to one psychic and he kept saying "we" as he directed his communication to me. I realized he was seeing me as what I would call a kindred spirit. I then realized there were a variety of things that I saw, and I just assumed everyone saw them, and they saw them the way I did. I was always somewhat puzzled why others were acting contrary to what should have been obvious choices. As I digested this experience, I realized we all have psychic-type abilities, but we all are incredibly unique. We all are different and see differently, let alone analyze what we see differently. Some of our abilities overlap with others, and we can look to see the energy they were experiencing, and at other times, no one in our life is seeing certain aspects of creation as we see it. Experience of physical creation tend to normalize our observations with each other. That is, we can point to a physical experience and agree with another on what we each are seeing. We then erroneously assume we see and experience the same thing. As a result, we really do not pay attention to how different we are actually perceiving what we experience, even where we think we can agree with another. However, when it comes to unseen experiences, we have no common ground. We often think we do, but we don't really know. Even those who report seeing through the eyes of another still filter their perception through their own mind. I then realized I could use individuals as energy detectors or sensors. That is, each individual was perceiving the energy of creation, and each was reporting what they see and the way they see it. Once I understood how to look for the biases of the individual's beliefs and how they were thinking, and looked to see the energy they were experiencing and trying to describe, I could substantiate an aspect of creation. I could then take all the reported perceptions of creations and just piece them together as a large jigsaw puzzle or tile mosaic. Each individual represented a piece of the puzzle or the mosaic. I could then stand back and look at the big picture I was seeing about how creativity and our creative imagination was perceiving the variety of aspects of creation. Given what I was seeing in the big picture, I could then predict the type and kinds of experiences someone would report that would fill in one of the holes in the picture, or I could see what will or should be reported to expand the big picture past the limits of what had been reported to me. Of course, the more the reported experience lied outside physical creation, the greater the challenge became to understand what exactly the individual could be seeing or sensing. Here, the bias of the human mind became very important, and its ability, or I should say inability, to understand a truly original creative experience never before experienced. I began seeing individuals as being energy detectors, and each one reporting on the nature of creation, and each one a unique detector. I listened to what they reported about their life experiences and how they were seeing creation worked in what they expressed, or how they described what was going on in their lives and their experiences. I looked at each as a data point from an instrument. Then I put all the data together. Given the picture that was painted in this process, I stood back and said, okay, what does the universe look like that explains all of these phenomena that people were reporting? How do they fit together in a coherent explanation? What I found was rather effective at understanding what people saw, and as said, I was being able to predict what other people would eventually see, even though there were holes in my observation. The holes simply indicated the kind of experience that would go into that hole. Eventually, I would find somebody reporting having that particular type and kind of experience. So the model for verification of the sanity of my observation was how my observations fit with this collection of all of what people reported and how it flowed together. In looking at it all, there is an elegance in the perspective, and that elegance itself became a sort of criteria that I could use when somebody reported something. If what was reported did not seem to fit the elegance, the question arose, was what they were reporting accurate, or only the best way they could describe what they were experiencing based on the information they had? That is, did they have the minimum set of experience to describe what they experienced? Sometimes it was not a complete or accurate reporting of exactly what they were experiencing, but then they would leave out details that did not seem to make sense to them. Also, given one's limited experience with something which they never experienced previously, it made perfect sense. One of the issues with creating and experience something never before experienced, our mind has no way to properly characterize it because it is something mind has not experienced. As for people reporting what was true for them, it was not hard to figure out if a person was not being completely honest. If there was lying, as in total fabrication of truth, or simply an evasion of truth, the inconsistencies would eventually reveal themselves. However, relative to talking about their personal experiences of life and perception of creation, I found people normally did not lie. Rather, they were excited to share how they were perceiving their experiences and happy to find somebody who would listen to them and hopefully understand. As a result of my criteria for ensuring the sanity of my observations was how well the reported information fit into this overall larger perspective and picture of creation. As said, the picture was a large tile mosaic where each individual's reported experiences was a little piece of the tile that goes into this big mosaic to create a coherent picture, or you can look at it as a different piece of a big jigsaw puzzle that were being collected and put together so you could see the entire picture that the jigsaw puzzle was creating. Even though all of the holes were not filled, there was a sufficient volume of information to say what the missing pieces would look like, and then it's a matter of just waiting until those pieces are found or reported to be found. Or, at other times, a piece was described which partially filled a hole or partially described a piece that already existed. Often the inadequacies of the piece identified was where the individual's mind did not have sufficient experiences to describe it completely. Here it needs to be added that the tile mosaic or the picture of the jigsaw puzzle would grow, and the individuals were found who had experiences outside those that are normally experienced that allowed for its growth. How do I use the validity check? As I reflect on my life and I piece together the RYUC Understanding, I found my life was guided in two ways. The first way was an internal guidance. The second was intervention. The first way of internal guidance arose from the fact that I was very accepting of life. I did not fight or argue with life. I probably learned this approach from my parents. The approach was more an attitude that centered on the belief that this is the way life is, we accept it, and we just deal with it. But I was aware there was an inner feeling I learned to follow. The feeling can best be described as an internal satisfaction in what I was experiencing. As a child, where I had the opportunity to choose what to do, I chose in the direction of what I felt was interesting or would be what I would describe as fun. In time, I realized it was not about what was fun, but I chose that which I thought would be internally satisfying as much as possible. When life presented something which did not feel internally satisfying, I looked to the way I was not satisfied and looked for a direction to go to make it more satisfying. Normally, there would be a question. I would ask, why was I not internally satisfied, and then look to the answer to that question. I would look to what I understood about creation and what I felt was the best decision I could, or choose a direction in life to go which allowed me to move more towards a satisfying life. This line of questioning over time caused me to look at the nature of creation, for I had many inadequate answered questions for many years. For many years, I believed what I was told by what I would call the authorities who claimed they knew the answer. However, in hearing Dr. Bidek talk about and look at our assumptions and our postulates when we are not getting the expected results, I began to look across all my life. In doing so, I slowly began to piece together a puzzle as to the nature of creation that would work for me relative to how I made my decisions in life. When I began to explore our creativity, it was there I began to see the root cause of many of the issues I found in my life and in many of the lives of others. When I began to explore our creativity, it was there I began to see the root cause of many of the issues I found in my life and in the lives of others. As I moved through my life, I was guided by both an inner feeling, which I described as an inner satisfaction, and in the questions I had about the situation I was facing in life. I found seeking to answer any unanswered question which was about our creativity always brought me back to one basic question. The basic question was, is what I was or am I seeking to answer in exploring one of the unanswered questions provide a feeling of inner satisfaction and a coherent and elegant perspective? Both of these were needed. All of my life I looked for that coherent and elegant perspective which allowed me to live and to act and to experience that inner satisfaction in life. I found I needed to look to see if what I find provides an inner satisfaction, or does it cause me to move off course and create an unnecessary dissatisfaction in my life in some way? Was there an incongruency in some way and did not seem to integrate? It could be an incongruency of the feeling, or it could be the experience was incongruent with the coherent and elegant perspective of creation. It was and is not about what I like or enjoy. Rather, there was an inner satisfaction and knowing about what was experienced. Was it moving me in the correct direction? That is, in flow with the unfolding energy within me and not opposed to it in any way. Did I feel a flow towards expansion within my being? Does what I found or continue to find allow me to feel life was worth living and internally satisfying, if not exciting? If not, what did I need to do to bring me back into that feeling of inner satisfaction? If I found something that did not allow me to feel life was worth living, I needed to look and understand why. In addition to this internal guidance system of internal satisfaction, coupled with a coherent and elegant perception or paradigm of creation, as previously discussed, I was drawn as if by creation itself to certain experiences. I found this occurred in two ways. One way was when I needed certain pieces of information, they would appear in some way. A chance meeting of someone, a magazine or newspaper article printed or electronically provided, or a broadcast of some type carrying the information I was seeking. The second way was my life events provided me with the needed experience. Often it was an experience I gained within a job, a trip, or a meeting of some type. But these needed experiences were very interesting. Often one would normally require being in a situation for an extended period of time for the experience. However, in my case, I was there at the exact time the particular experience could be had, and then I moved on. It was as though I needed just to be present to see a particular piece of information and did not need to spend any more time than necessary to obtain what was needed. In many ways, it was like the universe had me on a time schedule, and it was important I could not stay longer than necessary. Once I received the required information, I was quickly moved on to the next experience. Quite simply, I could not deny what I was observing or experiencing, whether I liked it or not. Consequently, I needed to develop an evolving perspective from which I could embrace all that I was finding and yet allow me to engage the world and dance with the world in which I found myself to both serve myself and the role I've been asked to play in that world. Often I found it quite challenging. Consequently, I continued to look to create a paradigm about life such that I could live in the world and effectively engage the world as it presented itself to me in the way the world presented itself. Yet the paradigm needed to incorporate all that I was learning and observing about our creativity. In this regard, I tried to make the RYUC Understanding, whether in the websites or the YouTube recordings, factual and reflect my best synthesis at the time of how creation seemed to work and integrated into a coherent picture. In these RYUC postings, I tried to avoid my personal opinion on what I was observing and what it meant for my life, and to actually live my life from this perspective. More personal feelings, opinions, and experiences are addressed in the RYUC After Action recording. Reliability of the observations and findings of the journey. As previously stated, a valid question that can be asked is, given the subjectivity and the uniqueness of the individual's perceptions, how can you as the listener or reader accept the reliability of the observations and findings of my journey if there is the possibility my perceptions is simply my illusion and has nothing to do with the generic truth? Three comments can be made. The first and probably the most important is, the understanding of what is reported allowed me to work with individuals to assist them to experience a more fulfilling and satisfying life. You could say the effectiveness of the understanding is the measure of its truth. This is, of course, if one is looking to live an internally satisfying life. The second comment is, I realize, given the limitations of the human mind to fully comprehend creation, any perception in my journey is only an approximation as to the correctness of what is true. It may be a good approximation, but not necessarily correct. Consequently, I continually looked and continue to look to see whatever conclusions I draw, how and where my conclusions could be incorrect and need upgraded. And of course, upgrading my perceptions of creation accordingly. The third is to look and continue to look across all reported human experiences as true and look for a way of understanding and viewing creation such that all that is reported by any human could be understood to be true. Here again, I cannot dispute the unique subjective perceptions of any human. Rather, it requires me to look at how each individual's subjective unique perception fits in with the bigger picture. If you wish, as previously said, you could look at each individual human experience as a small piece of an extremely large mosaic tile mural, and each individual piece needs to be fit into a bigger picture. It needs to be properly placed in the larger picture created by the mosaic mural. I needed to look for the orchestration which was giving rise to the diversity of creation I was experiencing in my own life and in the lives of others. This third comment addresses the question ever present as an undercurrent in the journey of exploration of our creativity. That is Is there a way to view creation that no matter what a person believes, they will have some type of experience of that belief, such that they can point to that experience as proof of what they believe is true? As a variation of this question was, not having met anyone who I felt was lying about their personal internal experiences they had, was there a way to view creation which would support such personal and subjective experiences as true? These questions arose in seeing individuals holding directly opposing views, each with their own supporting evidence that such a view was valid, and they held it so strongly they would be willing to harm or kill the other holding the opposing view. Arriving at the answer to this question required looking across the whole human experience. It was not to deny anyone's reported personal subjective experience. Rather, it was to see how their experience as true for them and look to see how did their perception fit into the overall bigger picture of how creation worked. The answer to these questions was that we are creators of our reality and the experiences in that reality. We create by how we focus our attention and awareness, by how and what we consciously and unconsciously think and believe, and creation is magical enough to mold itself to give us some form of our desired experience. What is reported in the RYUC Understanding is the best fit my mind could create to address all the data obtained on the journey and how we are such creators. The recommendation here is you eat and digest all that you read and hear, keeping what serves you and resonates within you and discard the remainder. It is also recommended you do your own experiments to see if what is said here is true. You, of course, are free to accept or reject any or all part of what is said here. In summary, as I said, the validity of my reported information came from the effectiveness of the big picture and its elegance. Its effectiveness was a measure of its truth, and one of the measures was it was very effective when I used the information to work with others to help them get a better understanding of their lives and what they needed to do to create a life that was more fulfilling and, in some cases, put them on a path to create a life worth living. The goal of the Releasing Your Unlimited Creativity Understanding is only my attempt at reporting what this big picture looks like and how it can be effectively used in your life. Unfortunately, I cannot give you the big picture. It is ultimately something to be experienced in your own unique way. It's like standing on the top of a high mountain looking at a broad sweeping valley below with all the myriad of details in the valley. I do not have the instrument like a camera to take a picture of it and send it to you. All I can do is describe the individual pieces the best I can, and hopefully you can piece them together in your own way that works for you and your unique creativity. Even though the big picture seems to be complete and able to embrace the whole of creation, seen and unseen, as to how creation seems to work, I continue to look across all reported human experiences that come to my attention as true and look for a way of understanding and viewing creation such that all that is reported by any human could be understood to be true and the reported experiences fit into this big picture. Here again, I cannot dispute unique subjective perception of any human. Rather, it requires me to look at how each individual's subjective, unique perception fits in with the bigger picture. The bottom line statement and simplest model or paradigm relative to this picture, as incredibly as it sounds, is that our awareness is an individualized aspect of the creative essence of creation, and we are creators of our reality and the experiences in that reality in conjunction with our higher self. We create by how we focus our attention and awareness, by how and what we consciously and unconsciously think and believe, and creation is magical enough to mold itself to give us some form of our desired experience for our current environment. However, as said, we create in conjunction with our higher self. Here I suggest you use the model of the octopus. The octopus is a central brain and the brain in each of its tentacles. The tentacles can operate individually or work together as directed by the central brain. Who we are is our higher self, much like the central portion of the octopus. Our human brain is much like the brain in one of the tentacles. It can operate independently or in orchestration with our higher self. In the awareness of being a creator raises the obvious question, how do we do this? I cannot give you the answer for how you personally do it. We all are too unique. I can give you my observations as to how it appears this process works based on what I have distilled down as a result of all that I have found and observed in the journey of exploration of our creativity. Closing thought and question. One of my goals in discussing events that occurred in my life is to bring your attention as the reader or listener to the types of events that occurs in your own life. So the question which I leave you with relative to this topic is, as you reflect on your life, what model or paradigm do you use to describe how creation works? Is it something you created based on your life experiences, or is it something another gave you and you just accept it as it is? It does not matter where it comes from. The question is it effective in your life for the life you wish to experience, or should it be revised in some way? As a creator, there's no one to blame. Rather, we need to look at ourselves and within ourselves and explore by asking why we have created the experiences we have. We may need to ask why I would create such an experience, then be open to the response that we get.